Hello folks, I'm Wes Kale. Welcome to the program. In today's discussion we're going to talk about how to get your project back on track. As you may have gathered by the title, this videocast is a sequel to Videocast 4, where we talked about how do you know when your project is in trouble. In Videocast 4 we discussed that there are basically two types of problematic projects. The first kind is those that are on fire, those that clearly have a problem that is obvious to everyone and that you need to get going on fixing it. And then there are those that give you a creeping sense of unease. It's really not clear that there's a problem. In fact, there are some things that are going well, but there are some things that aren't going so well, and it's not clear from all that what the true status is. And what we did is we provided you some measures that would allow you to clear away this fog, to determine substantively, concretely, whether the project was in trouble or not. Now, in this videocast, what we're going to cover is we're going to introduce a 6-step drill for turning around troubled projects. Whether those projects are the ones that are clearly on fire or the ones that you determined are in trouble based upon applying the measures we showed you in videocast 4. In either case, this drill will work. Now, when we say drill, what you need to understand is that it's going to take some time to get through this material. You may have noticed that there are several shows associated with this videocast because we're going to have to go deep on each one of these steps to explain the process, the conditional logic, some of the rules that you need to understand as you work your way through those steps. However, once you have that material down, executing on that drill can be done with almost reflexive speed. You will find with small projects you'll be able to turn around a plan and get it approved and get it implemented within a day. With larger projects, it will of course take some more time, but the fact of the matter is that you're going to have a drill that you'll be able to execute much faster than the kind of flailing around activity that most project managers go through when they recognize they got a problem and don't know how to solve it. You're going to have a process that you'll have clear control over that will reestablish you in control of your project and get it on the right track. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up this material into some bite-sized chunks that we can walk through in a controlled manner, and then at the end we'll pull it all together in a review so you can see as it all plays out in sequence. And then we're going to look at an example of how this model was applied to a real project, a fairly substantial project in the $300,000 to $800,000 range. And I'm confident that will give you a good overview of the material so that you can take the initiative with your troubled projects and turn them around and get them back on track. So, no further ado, let's look at the agenda for this first show. Okay, we're going to start off with some cautions. These are fairly self-explanatory. What we want to do is lay out some things that you need to guard against, particularly your instinctive reactions when you are confronting a troubled project, so that you don't make a bad situation worse. In the preface, what we're going to do is briefly review Videocast 4. This may be helpful for those of you who have not seen Videocast 4, as well as for those who saw it some time ago and need to be refreshed. It should save you some time in coming up to speed on what we're talking about here. Then we're going to cover the 6-step corrective action drill at a very high level, just to give you a placeholder to keep in mind as we drill down into the material in more detail in the following shows. Then we're going to talk about what I call the delivery and expectations gaps that exist in troubled projects and the associated alignment between those two different types of gaps. And this concept is central to being able to execute the corrective action drill because it tells you what your strategy should be with the project as well as what your strategy should be for yourself as a project manager and getting yourself out of trouble. So this is a core concept that we're pulling out here separately to walk through, and then when we actually go through the 6-step drill, we'll just touch upon how it's applied in the example because we've already covered the conceptual elements of it here. And then finally, we'll review what we've covered in this particular show. Moving on to the cautions. First, let's talk about the what not to do's. Okay, and there's basically 3 of them. And the first one is to act as if nothing is wrong. This is what I call a Titanic approach, and unfortunately it happens with surprising frequency. Basically what happens here is that when a PM determines that his project is in trouble, he acts like the band on the Titanic and just forges ahead and plays soothing music to the project team, hoping that a miracle will occur and that they'll all be saved. Unfortunately, that's not how things turn out. What you need to understand is that hope is not a strategy. When you recognize something is wrong, you need to take action against that and fix it. The other thing is that, aside from this particular project getting into trouble and going down, if you manifest this approach of acting as if nothing is wrong, you're going to eventually reach the point where it's clear that the emperor has no clothes, and this is going to undermine folks' confidence in you and your credibility on future projects. It has the potential of undermining your good standing in the organization. So you don't want to act as if nothing is wrong. Conversely, you don't want to engage in the work harder, work faster approach. I mean, if you find yourself at the bottom of a hole, the correct strategy is not to get busy digging faster in the hole. You need to come up with a different solution. Unfortunately, people tend to forget this and panic and start working harder and faster, doing the same things that got them into trouble in the first place. And lastly, you don't want to paint the rocks. And what this is that here the PM acknowledges that something's wrong, but conveys to the stakeholder community, the project team, that they're really not sure what to do with it, or it's not their problem to solve what's wrong with the project, that they're subject to forces beyond their control and they're just doing the best they can. So you're avoiding the emperor has no clothes problem because you agree that there's a problem, but instead of having that problem, what you do is you replace it with the I'm clueless about what to do about the situation problem, which really doesn't help you out much. So these are three things that you really don't want to do once you recognize your project's in trouble. You need to avoid these at all costs, even though instinctively you're going to want to do one or more of these. The second category of cautions are those things that you want to shy away from. The first one of these is blame throwing. And this is where you blame others for the various problems that are impinging upon your project. Now, I'll be honest here that this actually is a successful technique in certain environments. And that's why I say you want to shy away from it. It's not a do not do. It's a you want to shy away from it. What you need to understand is that, hey, we're trying to do some good here. And if you're going to engage in blame throwing, blaming management, blaming your customers, blaming your stakeholders about the problems on your project, you're not about doing good. You're about covering your butt, okay? And then you need to find something else to do. Don't do project management, okay? There's other ways of solving your problems other than blaming other people. But like I said, this can be an effective technique politically, particularly in situations where you have either distracted or ineffective leadership who don't have the time to pierce the veil between the allegations coming from you and the allegations coming from others about what's going on with the project. You might actually be able to buy yourself some time or some resources in order to address the project's problem. But in general, this is an unsuccessful strategy. And the second practice to shy away from is running to your boss with your hair on fire. While this may work when you're a junior PM, in your first couple of projects and you're not sure what to do and you're still trying to get yourself oriented in a new environment, running to the boss seeking help is undoubtedly a successful way of addressing things. However, in time, that's going to get old. You're going to end up falling into the high maintenance bucket where you're viewed as someone who can't seem to make their own decisions, has to always get the approval of the boss, or has to always get things checked out with their boss before they do anything. And that's going to hurt you in the long term. So it may be successful in a given transaction, a couple of transactions, particularly if you're a junior. In the long term, this is a self-destructive strategy and you need to shy away from it. Instead, what we want to encourage you to do, consistent with our top 5 behaviors, is to practice think, then do. Okay? You need to think about what's going on and then do it. And as you will see, we're going to hit this think, then do piece very heavy when we get to the first 2 steps of the drill. Okay, so let's move on to the preface. Now, for those of you who have already seen Videocast 4, you may recall that we identified that there were 2 reasons that projects get into trouble. The first is that they're subject to what we call destructive acts, and we'll talk about that in a second. And secondly, they will go through what we call degeneration, and degeneration accounts for the vast majority of those instances where projects get into trouble. Let's talk a little bit about these to reorient ourselves. As we said with destructive acts, these account for about 1/3 of all the cases of projects getting into trouble. And there are 2 flavors of destructive acts. And the first is what we call mortal wounds. And these are actions that are so egregious that it's obvious to everyone they place the project in trouble, in jeopardy. And some examples of those would be when a project's canceled. Okay, someone may issue an edict that the project's canceled. That edict may or may not be actually executed, but it's been put out that we're going to cancel this project. That has a tremendous chilling effect upon momentum and will and support for an effort. And even if the project is reinitiated, it may have already been killed from a will and sustainment standpoint. Another destructive act is to cut the budget by 50% or more. There could be reorganizations or reduction in force, which will affect multiple projects, not just this particular project. or the project sponsor can leave the effort. They can leave the company, they can move into a new role, they're no longer sponsoring the project, whatever. These are all such material actions that they automatically jeopardize the good standing of the project and place it in doubt as to whether it will ever deliver. Now, the interesting thing about mortal wounds is that because they so obviously place the project in jeopardy, they provide a window to renegotiate expectations. For example, if management is going to cut the project budget by 50%, it's probably not reasonable to expect that we'll deliver all the scope or we'll deliver it on the schedule that was originally agreed to. So let's revisit all of the assumptions around the project. Now, this condition where expectations are open to renegotiation is one of the reasons why crafty managers seldom choose a destructive act that is a mortal wound, because they don't want to renegotiate the terms of the project. So they may not want to cut your budget by 50% because they recognize that, well, I'll have to cut scope, but I'll have to move the dates. So instead what they'll do is they'll cut the budget by 30%. And that way I can hold you to scope and I can hold you to schedule that we originally agreed to, yet I get to save 30% of the budget. It's just one of the idiosyncrasies of how people tend to deal with these types of situations. So instead of a mortal wound, crafty managers are more likely to inflict what we call as a mobility kill. And this is an action which is apparently less severe. It's not as obvious that this is something that places the project in jeopardy, but that's only because the immediate effects are not that obvious. But these are pernicious type of actions that will eventually erode away the project and have just the same effect as a mortal wound. It just takes time for it to manifest itself. And what we're talking about here are things like this. Project sponsor has agreed to a decision-making model where decisions will be made in collaboration amongst 5 people that meet every 2 months. Great. That means we'll get decisions every 2 months on things. That won't work for the project. So basically, while that decision-making model seemed to meet the needs of the sponsor and the other stakeholders that were participants in the project, they have effectively just killed the project at its start. And other types of decisions such as that, which take a while to manifest themselves but have the same effect upon the project, they basically kill it off at the beginning. But what you need to understand is that that crafty manager that we discussed a moment ago, because these types of mobility kills are not obviously threats in the beginning, it takes time for them to manifest themselves, they don't open up that window as wide to allow for the renegotiation of expectations. And consequently, this is what you typically see as the type of destructive act that takes place on most projects. As those crafty managers we talked about, essentially for other reasons like trying to maintain goodwill with stakeholders or trying to be fiscally disciplined, they take actions that seem prudent at the time they're making the decision, but in the long term actually harm the project. But it's not clear that they harm the project, so they want to err on the side of doing what is clearly in their interest, like maintaining goodwill, like saving a couple of $1,000s. That's clearly in their interest, and that's what they're going to do, because it's not clear there's immediate negative consequence. They just hope there won't be a negative consequence. You as a PM cannot rely upon hope as a strategy. The manager might, you can't. So those are destructive acts. Let's talk about degeneration. And this is what we spent most of videocast 4 discussing, and this accounts for 2/3 of the trouble projects you're going to encounter in your career. This is the classic things are falling apart scenario that the discipline of project management was created to overcome. And what takes place here is that there's an accumulation of new learnings, oversights, errors, shortcuts, political machinations, and just plain bad luck that eventually accrues to the point that the project is just brought to its knees. And these are the projects that are subject to what I call Newton's fourth law. And that is, if a project is falling apart, it's going to continue to do that until you do something about it. And that's what videocast 4 was focused upon, which was how to see those signs first so that you know that your project is in trouble, that it's subject to these forces and is falling apart so that you can get in front of it. And what we covered in videocast 4 were the following. We said that the signs of deterioration are generally very hard to see. In fact, it's so hard to see these signs that a project is in trouble that you establish the rule that the absence of clarity that things are well is by definition a sign that things are not well. So what we're saying is that